A battered dog so shut down he won't look at a human, until a tiny child walks up, and the dog gently leans in. A shelter worker who won't let him be written off. A low whistle that makes the dog freeze. A whisper of ledgers. A quiet deal that smells like trafficking. And a contractor who thinks animals are property. What looks like a simple act of kindness suddenly becomes the hinge of something far darker. Corruption, conditioning, and a hidden rescue from the dog's past that no one expected. In 30 seconds, you'll see a bond form that starts a chain reaction. Bravery, lies exposed, and a choice that will risk everything. Who will the dog trust when the people trying to save him are the ones in danger? And who will pay the price? The morning light hadn't yet reached the concrete walls of County Animal Services when Larkin Hayes unlocked the heavy back door. The familiar smell of bleach and kibble wrapped around her as she flipped on the fluorescent lights, their artificial glow making the metal kennels look even colder. She hung her worn denim jacket on the hook, rolled up her sleeves, and started her daily routine. The sound of barking rose as the dogs noticed movement in the corridor. "Good morning to you too," she said softly, checking water bowls as she walked past. The radio crackled. "County van incoming," the front desk announced. "New intake." Larkin grabbed her clipboard and headed to the receiving bay. The van's brakes squealed as it backed up to the loading dock. 2 animal control officers climbed out, their faces grim. "Found him on Route 16, the taller officer said, opening the van's rear doors. "No collar, no chip." The German Shepherd inside pressed against the far wall of the transport cage. Even in the shadows, Larkin could see the torn ear, the scarring around his muzzle. His muscles were rigid, waiting for the next blow that experience had taught him would come. "Easy there, big guy," Larkin murmured. She kept her movements slow and predictable as she helped guide the transport cage inside. The dog's eyes darted everywhere except at the humans around him. At the intake area, Larkin began the paperwork. Male German Shepherd mix, approximately 4 years old. No identification? She paused, watching him. "We'll call him Rook." "That one's going to be trouble," Mark from kennel staff said, peering through the cage bars. "Look at that body language. Probably been fighting." "Those aren't fight scars," Larkin said quietly. "Those are restraint marks. Someone did this to him." "Either way, we're already over capacity. If he's aggressive..." "Give him a chance," Larkin cut in. "Let me work with him in isolation first." Mark shrugged. "Your call. But the evaluation deadline's Friday." After they transferred Rook to the isolation kennel, Larkin grabbed a folding chair. She set it up several feet from his pen and simply sat, pretending to do paperwork. Every few minutes, she'd glance at him, then look away. The Shepherd remained frozen in the back corner, watching shadows. "Brought you some coffee," a familiar voice said. Jonah Calder, his gray volunteer vest slightly crooked, limped over with 2 steaming cups. "You're a lifesaver," Larkin said, accepting one. Jonah had been volunteering at the shelter for years, ever since losing his own dog. He understood the long hours, the emotional toll. "New arrival?" He nodded toward Rook. "Yeah, he's had it rough, but there's something about him." "I trust your instincts," Jonah said simply. He'd seen Larkin work with enough difficult cases to know she could read dogs better than anyone. The morning stretched into afternoon. Larkin moved through her other duties but kept returning to sit near Rook's pen. She talked softly about nothing in particular. The weather, shelter gossip, her ancient coffee maker that refused to die. Gradually, the rigid tension in Rook's shoulders eased slightly. As closing time approached, the front desk buzzed again. "Last-minute visitor," the receptionist said. Larkin looked up to see a young woman with dark curls entering the kennel area, carrying a toddler on her hip. The woman's eyes held that particular weariness Larkin recognized from too many nights without enough sleep. "I'm sorry, we're almost closed," Larkin started to say. "Please," the woman said. "I just need a quiet moment. My son Bram, he loves dogs, and it's been—" She trailed off, adjusting the child's weight. "I'm Tamsin. We won't be long." Something in Tamsin's voice made Larkin nod. "Stay on the main aisle," she said. "Some of these dogs get excited around children." Tamsin set Bram down, keeping hold of his hand as he took wobbly steps. The toddler's face lit up at each bark and wiggling tail they passed. When they reached Rook's pen, Larkin tensed, ready to guide them away. But Bram pulled free of his mother's grasp and tottered straight to the fence. Before anyone could move, he pressed his small hand against the chain link. And Rook, defensive, traumatized Rook who hadn't made eye contact all day, slowly lifted his head. The shepherd took one careful step forward, then another. With infinite gentleness, he lowered his muzzle to where Bram's fingers poked through the fence. Larkin held her breath. Tamsin reached for her son, but Larkin touched her arm. "Wait," she whispered. Rook's tail gave one tentative wag. He settled onto his belly, bringing himself to Bram's eye level. The toddler giggled, and for the first time, Rook's eyes met someone else's gaze. "Well," Jonah said softly from behind them. "Would you look at that?" The next morning, word of Rook's interaction with Bram spread through the shelter like wildfire. Staff members who had written the shepherd off as another lost cause now peered curiously into his pen. Rook had retreated to his corner again, but something had shifted in the air around him. Larkin reviewed the security footage during her lunch break, watching the moment replay on the grainy screen. The transformation in Rook's body language was remarkable, from rigid fear to careful gentleness in the space of heartbeats. "Mind if I join you?" Tamsin stood in the doorway of the break room, Bram balanced on her hip. "Please." Larkin gestured to the empty chair. "I was actually hoping to talk to you about yesterday." Tamsin settled Bram with a small toy truck before sitting. "He's always been good with animals," she said, watching her son. "Even when he was tiny. It's like he knows which ones need gentle handling." "Has he been around many dogs?" A shadow crossed Tamsin's face. "His father, my ex, he bred guard dogs, but we left before Bram was walking." She twisted the sleeve of her sweater. "Silas Keene. Maybe you've heard of him? He does a lot of contract work in the county." The name rang a distant bell, but Larkin kept her expression neutral, noting how Tamsin's shoulders tensed at mentioning him. "The way Rook responded to Bram was extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it, especially from a dog with his level of trauma." "Some things you don't forget," Tamsin said quietly, "even when you want to." She gathered Bram closer, as if by instinct. Before Larkin could probe further, Merle Whitcomb's sharp voice cut through the break room. "Hayes, a word?" The shelter director stood in the doorway, glasses perched on her head as usual. Her mouth was set in a familiar line of disapproval. "Excuse me," Larkin said to Tamsin, following Merle to her office. "This business with the shepherd needs to stop," Merle said as soon as the door closed. "One sweet moment with a toddler doesn't erase severe behavioral issues. We need that kennel space." "He's not aggressive," Larkin insisted. "He's shut down from abuse. Give me more time." "Time we don't have. Either reclassify him as untreatable by Friday or I'll do it myself." Merle shuffled papers on her desk. "Sometimes kindness means making hard decisions, Larkin. You can't save them all." "Watch me try," Larkin muttered as she left the office. She found Jonah in the supply room, sorting donations. "Need some contraband blankets?" he asked with a slight smile. "You're the best kind of criminal." Larkin helped him load extra bedding into a cart. Merle's pushing for Rook's evaluation deadline. Already ahead of you. I switched some scheduling around. I'll cover evening shifts this week. Give you more time with him. That night, after everyone else had left, Larkin sat cross-legged outside Rook's pen. The shepherd watched her warily from his corner, but his ears stayed forward, interested despite his fear. "What happened to you?" she wondered aloud. Something about Tamsin's guarded mentions of her ex-husband nagged at her. Guard dogs, training, the scars around Rook's muzzle. On impulse, Larkin tried a low whistle, the kind often used in dog training. The effect was immediate and heartbreaking. Rook's entire body went rigid. He pressed himself against the back wall, trembling, his eyes glazing with panic. "Oh God, I'm sorry," Larkin breathed. She turned her face away, giving him space to recover. The reaction was too specific to be random. Someone had used that whistle to hurt him, systematically enough to embed the trauma deep in his muscles and memory. The pieces were starting to form a darker picture. The worn rings around his muzzle spoke of long-term restraint. His trigger response to the whistle suggested cruel training methods. And his inexplicable gentleness with Bram hinted at a capacity for connection that abuse hadn't managed to break. Larkin spent the next hour just sitting quietly, letting Rook process that no punishment followed the whistle. By midnight, he had settled enough to lie down, though his eyes never fully closed. "We'll figure this out," she promised him softly. "Whatever happened before, it's over now. I won't let anyone hurt you again." But as she watched him feign sleep, Larkin couldn't shake the feeling that Rook's story was tangled with threads of human cruelty that reached far beyond the shelter's walls. The whistle response was too trained, too specific. Someone had put serious time into breaking this dog's spirit, and she was beginning to suspect she knew exactly who that someone might be. Larkin spread the documentation across the shelter's breakroom table while preparing her case. Video logs showed Rook's gradual progression from complete shutdown to cautious awareness. Her careful notes detailed feeding schedules, response patterns, and every small victory, like the first time he accepted food while she was in view. "The board needs concrete evidence," she explained to Jonah as he reviewed her findings. "Not just my gut feeling." "These marks around his muzzle," Jonah pointed to a close-up photo. "Those aren't from a regular collar." "No." Larkin touched the image. "See how the scarring forms perfect rings? Whatever restrained him was used repeatedly, probably for extended periods." She pulled out another photo showing Rook's distinctive gait. "And look how he favors his left side when walking. That's learned behavior, not injury." The shelter's hallway buzzed with morning activity as staff arrived. Through the break-room window, Larkin watched Merle march past, already on her phone. The director's voice carried through the thin walls. "Yes, we always consider private placement first. No, I understand your concerns about liability." Merle disappeared into her office, but her words left an uneasy feeling in Larkin's stomach. Jonah helped organize the petition materials. "You know how the board operates. They want numbers, not stories." "Then I'll give them numbers." Larkin pulled up the shelter's intake statistics. "Average rehabilitation time for severe trauma cases is 6 weeks. I'm only asking for 4. And look at his response markers. They're already improving." The morning crawled by as Larkin refined her presentation. Around noon, a familiar voice brightened the front desk area. Tamsin had returned with Bram, the little boy clutching his toy truck. "We were in the neighborhood," Tamsin explained, but her eyes held a question. "How is he?" "Why don't you see for yourself?" Larkin led them to Rook's kennel, maintaining a careful distance. The change in Rook was immediate, As soon as he spotted Bram, his ears softened and his rigid posture relaxed. The little boy babbled happily, showing his truck to the dog through the chain link. "This is what I mean," Larkin said quietly, documenting the interaction. "This isn't random. He recognizes children, or at least he associates them with safety." Tamsin watched the scene with mixed emotion. Silas used to say dogs were tools, not pets. That kindness made them weak. She hugged herself. He had special methods for training guard dogs. I never saw them, but sometimes at night, I'd hear... She trailed off as Merle appeared at the end of the run. The director's expression hardened at the sight of visitors near Rook's kennel. "Mrs. Cortez," Merle said stiffly, "this area isn't open to the public." "They're here at my invitation," Larkin interjected. "I'm documenting Rook's socialization responses for the board petition." "Ah, yes. Your crusade." Merle's tone dripped with disapproval. "The board has more pressing concerns than one unadoptable dog. Private placement might be more practical." "Private placement?" Larkin felt her chest tighten. "With whom?" "That's not your concern." Merle turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Hayes, the deadline stands. Friday." After Merle left, Tamsin gathered Bram quickly. "We should go. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "No, wait." Larkin touched her arm gently. "What you said about Silas's training methods, would you be willing to make a statement?" Fear flickered across Tamsin's face. "I can't. He has connections everywhere. If he found out—" Larkin watched them leave, her mind racing. She spent the afternoon examining Rook more carefully, cataloging every scar and learned behavior. The way he flinched from raised hands, how he pressed against walls when cornered. The absolute silence of his responses. A trained silence. "Living weapons," Jonah said quietly, helping her photograph the evidence. "That's what guard dog trainers call them." "But he's not a weapon." Larkin's voice was fierce. "Look how he is with Bram. Whatever they did to him, they couldn't break that part of him completely." She added the new photos to her petition file. Close-ups of the muzzle scarring, documentation of his defensive positions, video clips of his interaction with Bram. The evidence painted a clear picture, not of random cruelty, but of systematic conditioning. "Merle's calls about private placement," Larkin said suddenly. "What if someone's trying to reclaim him? You think Silas knows he's here?" "I think we need to move fast." Larkin began copying her documentation. "The board meets tomorrow morning. I'm not letting Rook disappear into another training compound." That evening, as she made her final rounds, Larkin paused at Rook's kennel. The shepherd watched her with dark eyes that held too much understanding. "I see you," she told him softly. "I see what they did, and I'm going to prove it." In the dim light, his scars told their own story, one of force disguised as training, of pain masked as discipline. But when Bram had stood before him, Rook had shown his true nature. That was the dog Larkin would fight for, the one who still remembered gentleness despite everything. She just hoped the board would give her enough time to prove it. The next morning, Larkin spread intake records across her desk, searching for patterns in the sea of paperwork. Morning light filtered through the dusty blinds, casting stripes across the documented lives and deaths of countless animals. Jonah stood nearby, nursing his third coffee, the dark circles under his eyes matching hers. "Look at these dates," she said, pointing to a cluster of forms with her chewed pencil. 6 dogs transferred to private training facilities in the last 3 months. No follow-up documentation, no contact information, nothing to show where they actually ended up. Jonah leaned closer, the scent of coffee and faded aftershave mingling as he squinted at the papers. His calloused finger traced the signature line. "And all signed off by Merle, every single one. Nancy at the front desk mentioned something yesterday." Larkin lowered her voice to barely above a whisper, glancing toward the half-open door. Cash payments? No questions asked. The dogs just disappeared. No adoption photos, no follow-up calls. Like they never existed. They worked through lunch, hunger forgotten as they pieced together a troubling picture. Fragments of conversations and hastily scribbled notes formed a pattern neither wanted to acknowledge. Shelter staff whispered about night pickups, about Merle's special arrangements with local handlers. No one questioned it. Budget cuts made everyone grateful for empty kennels, fewer mouths to feed, fewer decisions about which animals lived or died. Some of these dogs had behavior notes similar to Rook's, Jonah observed, pushing his glasses higher on his nose. Defensive posturing, trained responses, heightened reactivity to specific stimuli, not random strays, dogs with history. Larkin's stomach churned with a sick certainty. She remembered Tamsin's words about Silas's methods, the careful way she'd spoken, like someone accustomed to measuring every syllable. The puzzle pieces were fitting together into something ugly. When Tamsin arrived that afternoon with Bram nestled against her chest, Larkin pulled her aside to a quiet corner of the break room. "I need to ask you something. About Silas. About his business." Tamsin's shoulders tensed immediately, her arms tightening protectively around her sleeping son. "He won't like me talking about his business. He's very particular about his privacy." "He still has that much control over what you say? Even now?" "You don't understand." Tamsin's voice shook, her eyes darting to the door as if expecting him to materialize. "The custody agreement for Bram, it's hanging by a thread. He has lawyers, connections with the judge. People owe him favors. One wrong move and I could lose everything. I could lose my son." "Did he train dogs? For security work?" Larkin pressed gently, hating the fear blooming across Tamsin's face. Tamsin nodded slowly, unconsciously rocking Bram as if to comfort herself. He called it conditioning. Said fear made them stronger, more reliable. That kindness made them soft. She wrapped one arm around herself, the other still cradling Bram. "Sometimes I'd hear whistles at night, and the dogs, they'd go silent, like they'd learned what happens when they make noise. I'd find blood on the training equipment the next morning." Larkin thought of Rook's reaction to the whistle, the terror in his eyes. "Did you ever see a black and tan shepherd, with a torn ear? About 2 years old now, maybe?" I tried not to look too closely. Tamsin's eyes darted toward the door again, her breath coming quicker. "Please, I shouldn't be here. If he finds out I've been talking about him..." After Tamsin left, clutching Bram like a lifeline, Larkin dove deeper into the records, driven by a growing sense of urgency. In a dusty filing cabinet, behind stacks of old vaccination records and euthanasia reports, she found a manila envelope, unlabeled but thick with contents. Her hands trembled as she spread the contents across her desk. Photos from a property inspection 3 years ago, routine checks that were supposed to ensure animal welfare standards. What they revealed made her breath catch. Chain-link kennels arranged in rows, far from residential sightlines. Heavy leather muzzles hanging on hooks like trophies. A training area with equipment she couldn't identify. And there, a dog that could be Rook, younger but with the same watchful eyes, wearing one of those muzzles, ribs visible beneath his coat. A man stood in the background, face turned away but stance familiar from Tamsin's descriptions. Broad-shouldered, authoritative, one hand holding something that might have been a training tool or might have been a weapon. "Jonah," she called softly, her throat tight. "Look at this." He studied the photo, lines deepening around his mouth. "Could be Silas. Can't see his face clear enough to prove it in court, though." "But it's Rook. Look at the markings, the ear." Larkin's voice hardened with certainty and growing rage. "They did this to him, trained him through fear until he broke, and now they want him back, to do God knows what with him. She confronted Merle that afternoon, photo in hand. The director barely glanced at it before dismissing it with a wave of her manicured fingers. Unsubstantiated, Merle said flatly, organizing pens in her desk drawer with methodical precision. And irrelevant to our current situation. We need the space. End of discussion. For more private placements, more cash deals that never make it to the official books? Larkin challenged, planting her hands on Merle's immaculate desk. Merle's eyes narrowed, the glasses perched on her head catching the fluorescent light. We operate on a shoestring budget, Hayes. Sometimes we need creative solutions to keep the doors open. I'd think someone who claims to care about animals would understand that. Creative solutions? Larkin's voice rose, color flooding her cheeks. Is that what you call selling dogs to people who abuse them? Who condition them through fear and pain? I call it staying operational. Merle straightened papers on her desk, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Larkin's emotion. The board understands practical necessity. Do you? Or should we discuss your continued employment here? The threat was clear as crystal. Larkin left Merle's office, hands shaking with anger that had nowhere to go. In Rook's kennel, she crouched by the chain link, watching him watch her. His eyes, so wary, yet somehow trusting, looked back at her from across a gulf of human cruelty. I won't let them take you, she promised quietly, pressing her fingers against the metal that separated them. Whatever Silas did to you before, it stops here. I swear it does. The photo felt heavy in her pocket, physical proof of cruelty hidden behind paperwork and procedure and bureaucratic indifference. She'd started this wanting to save one dog. Now she was uncovering something darker, a system of quiet deals and turned backs, of money-changing hands while animals suffered. Rook met her eyes briefly, a rare moment of trust that felt like a gift. In his gaze, she saw the weight of everything he'd endured, and everything she still had to prove before either of them could be free of fear. Back at her desk, Larkin spread out a fresh notepad and began listing what she knew. Her pen moved quickly, driven by determination that made her handwriting sharper than usual. She underlined key points twice, pressing hard enough to leave indentations on the next page. Merle's unauthorized transfers, cash payments, missing documentation. The whistle response. The photo with the muzzle. We need more, she muttered, tapping her pen against the edge of the desk. Something concrete, something they can't explain away. She chewed her bottom lip, staring at the list until the words began to blur. Jonah appeared with 2 cups of coffee, the cheap break room kind that smelled better than it tasted. He set one beside her notes, careful not to spill on her meticulous work. Steam curled between them like a question mark. I can watch the intake desk during my volunteer shifts, he offered, leaning against the filing cabinet. Note any odd payments, special pickups, the kind that don't make it into the official log. His eyes reflected the same quiet determination she felt, building in her chest. Thanks. Larkin wrapped her hands around the warm cup, drawing comfort from its heat against her palms. But we need to move fast. If Merle pushes this through... She didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what was at stake. She found Tamsin in the shelter's small break room later that day. The harsh fluorescent lights cast unflattering shadows under the young mother's eyes. Bram played with wooden blocks on the faded linoleum floor, stacking them with surprising dexterity for a 1-year-old. His small hands moved with purpose, while his mother watched with tired eyes that carried too much weight for someone so young. I need to know more about Silas, Larkin said quietly, sliding into the molded plastic chair across from her. Anything that might help protect Rook. Patterns, connections, how he works. Tamsin's fingers worried at her sleeve, picking at a loose thread. He's particular about his reputation. The contracting business does well. Custom homes, commercial projects, everyone knows Keene Construction. She lowered her voice. But the dogs... She glanced down at Bram, who was completely absorbed in his blocks. He sees them as tools, assets, investments that need to perform. The whistle training? Larkin prompted, keeping her tone gentle. Standard guard dog stuff, he said. But his methods? Tamsin shuddered, her shoulders drawing up tight. The dogs learned fast, too fast, like they knew something terrible would happen if they didn't. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. And it did. Larkin reached for her phone, scrolling through files until she found what she needed. She pulled up an audio file from old intake records, labeled only with a number. She pressed play. A sharp, distinct whistle pattern cut through the static. 3 notes rising, then a pause, then 2 descending tones. Tamsin went pale, the blood draining from her face so quickly that Larkin worried she might faint. That's it. That's his call. Her voice trembled. That's what he used when he wanted immediate obedience. Later that afternoon, while scanning security footage from the previous week, Larkin found another clip, this one showing Rook's reaction to the same whistle pattern. Someone off-camera had replicated it, perhaps accidentally, perhaps as a test. The change in the dog was immediate and disturbing. His posture changed instantly, head low, ears flat, muscles rigid, awaiting command. Every line of his body spoke of tension and fear masquerading as discipline. It's conditioning, she told Jonah, rewinding the clip to show him again. Deep training through fear. The whistle triggers an automatic response. Look at his eyes. He's not even really present. It's like he goes somewhere else. A memo appeared in her inbox late in the day, its innocuous subject line masking its true purpose. Merle had scheduled an external review board for the following week. To assess transfer eligibility of current cases and optimize space utilization. The timing wasn't coincidental. Nothing ever was with Merle. Larkin marched to Merle's office, clutching a hastily completed emergency hold request form. Her knuckles turned white around the paper as she rapped sharply on the doorframe. "We need more time," she said without preamble. "There are serious concerns about..." Denied. Merle didn't even look up from her computer, the blue glow from the screen reflecting off her glasses. The review board will make their determination based on current shelter capacity and behavior assessments. Standard procedure. This is about Silas Keene, isn't it? Larkin stepped fully into the office, refusing to be dismissed. His private training facility? The one that conveniently has no address on file? Merle's expression hardened as she finally met Larkin's gaze. Be careful, Hayes. Accusations need proof. Substantial proof. The unspoken threat hung between them like a guillotine blade. That evening, Tamsin lingered after closing, clearly struggling with something she couldn't quite bring herself to say. Larkin busied herself with paperwork, giving the young mother space, waiting patiently while Bram dozed in his mother's arms, his blonde curls damp with sleep against her shoulder. There was a fire, Tamsin finally said, her voice carrying in the empty front office. 2 years ago, at one of Silas's properties, a trailer where he kept the dogs during training. She took a shaky breath that seemed to catch in her throat. A kid, one of his workers' children, was trapped inside, just 4 years old. Rook, he got her out. Broke his training, ignored the whistle, everything. Just went in, through the flames. He saved her? Larkin leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe. Tamsin nodded, gently adjusting Bram's weight against her. Silas was furious. Said Rook was compromised, unreliable. Said a guard dog that chooses who to protect is worthless. Her voice dropped. That's when what? Larkin prompted softly, when the silence stretched too long. That's when the really harsh training started. Silas said he had to break him completely, make an example. Tamsin's voice cracked. I left soon after. Couldn't watch anymore. Couldn't let Bram grow up seeing that kind of cruelty treated as normal. Larkin sat back in her chair, pieces clicking into place like tumblers in a lock. Rook's scars, his fear of sudden movements, his gentle reaction to Bram. A dog trained through fear who still chose to save a child, and was punished for that moment of pure compassion. The ultimate betrayal of the bond between human and animal. She looked at her notes, at the photo with the muzzle, at the documentation of whistles and transfers. A pattern of cruelty hidden behind paperwork and procedure, legitimized by official stamps and bureaucratic blindness. But now she had something else. Proof that Rook wasn't just a victim of abuse, but a hero who'd chosen mercy over conditioning, who'd risked everything to save a child. The fire, she said, thoughts racing ahead. Would there be records, news reports, fire department calls? Silas kept it quiet, paid off the family. Tamsin adjusted Bram in her arms as he stirred slightly. But the worker, Marco Ramirez, he might talk. He quit right after, moved his family away. Last I heard they were in Parkfield, about 40 minutes east. Larkin wrote down the name, her pen pressing firmly into the paper. Another piece of the puzzle, another thread to pull. The picture was becoming clearer. Not just individual cruelty, but a system of silence and complicity that needed to be exposed. A web of money and influence that trapped both animals and people. In Rook's kennel, the shepherd watched her with those knowing eyes that seemed to understand far more than they should. She thought of him charging into fire, defying pain and training to save a child. The same quiet bravery she saw when he first approached Bram, overcoming his fear to make that fragile connection. We're going to prove what happened, she promised him softly, her fingers curling through the kennel bars. All of it, no matter what it takes. Larkin spread documents across her kitchen table, sticky notes and coffee cups creating an island of investigation. Jonah had managed to copy 3 months of shelter intake records, each showing suspicious patterns in Merle's transfers. Look at these timestamps, Jonah said, pointing to a series of entries. Cash payments, always after hours. No proper adoption screenings. His fingers, calloused from years of carpentry work, traced the paper trails. Good work. Larkin rubbed her tired eyes. We need more, though. Tamsin's testimony could be crucial. As if summoned by her name, Larkin's phone buzzed with a text from Tamsin. Can we talk? Bringing Bram. An hour later, they sat in the shelter's quiet break room. Bram played with wooden blocks, while Tamsin spoke in hushed tones about Silas's operation. He called it specialized training, Tamsin explained, her fingers twisting in her lap. But it was cruel. The dogs would come in strong, healthy, leave broken. Did he ever document the training? He kept records. Everything had to look legitimate for his clients. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through old photos. Here, this was his setup. The images showed a compound of kennels, training equipment, and a worn trailer in the background, the same one that had burned. A knock at the door made them jump. Jonah entered, his face tight. You need to see this. Front desk. At reception, a cream-colored envelope sat prominently on the counter. Inside was a brief note in precise handwriting. Regarding my property, let's discuss terms. It was signed simply, Silas Keene. He's getting bold, Larkin muttered. There's more, Jonah said. Merle's been making calls. I heard her mention clearing problematic assets. Back in the kennels, they found Rook, watching Bram through the chain link. The toddler had wandered close, supervised by Tamsin. Something in the dog's posture changed, alert but gentle, tracking every movement of the child with careful attention. "It's like he's guarding him," Jonah observed. "But not like Silas's training. This is different." Larkin nodded. "Natural protective instinct, not forced compliance." She turned to Tamsin. "Would you be willing to make a formal statement about everything you saw?" Tamsin hesitated, watching Bram. "Silas has connections, money. He makes problems disappear. Which is why we need to do this properly." Larkin pulled out her phone. "I know someone, county attorney who handles pro bono cases. She's been looking for patterns of institutional negligence." Fear flickered across Tamsin's face, but determination followed. "If it stops him, if it protects others from what I saw." She straightened her shoulders. "Yes, I'll testify." That afternoon, Larkin met with Sarah Chen, the attorney, in a small coffee shop away from the shelter. Sarah reviewed their evidence with sharp eyes. "Merle's transfer procedures are definitely questionable," she said. "Multiple violations of county guidelines, but proving Silas's connection requires more." "We have Tamsin," Larkin replied, "and maybe others, former employees who saw his methods." "Good. We'll need—" Sarah stopped as Larkin's phone buzzed. A text from Jonah. "Merle looking for you. Not happy." Larkin found Merle in her office, face flushed with barely contained anger. "You've been accessing restricted records," she said flatly, "questioning my procedures." "Following proper channels for a case review," Larkin corrected. "Let me be clear." Merle leaned forward. "This shelter operates on tight margins. Staff who create problems tend to find their positions eliminated." "Is that a threat?" "A reality check. Drop this crusade, Hayes. Some things are better left alone." But Larkin couldn't leave it alone. Not with Rook's scars. Not with Tamsin's haunted eyes. Not with the growing evidence of a system that traded animals' lives for profit. Later, watching Rook with Bram again, she saw the dog inch closer to the fence. Bram reached out, fearless, and Rook gently nudged the tiny hand with his nose. "He remembered," Tamsin whispered, "from the fire, helping that little girl. Maybe that's why—" Larkin nodded. This wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. It was about protecting something pure, the connection between a gentle child and a dog who'd chosen compassion over conditioning. She gathered her files. Intake records, Tamsin's photos, Sarah's legal notes. A case building piece by piece, each document a stone in the wall they'd build against Silas's influence and Merle's complicity. "We do this right," she told her small team. "Everything documented, everything legal." Tamsin picked up Bram, holding him close. "I'll tell them everything. About the training, the fire, all of it." Her voice strengthened. "He can't hide behind money forever." Through the kennel wire, Rook watched them with quiet intelligence, his presence a reminder of what they fought for. Not just one dog's life, but the chance to break a cycle of cruelty that had gone unchallenged for too long. Larkin's hands trembled as she studied the crumpled paper. The ledger page, torn and coffee-stained, held rows of neat numbers and a partial name that made her heart race. S. Kia, followed by payment amounts that seemed too high for standard adoptions. The paper felt like evidence of something she'd long suspected but could never prove. Corruption hiding in plain sight under bureaucratic normality. "Where did you find this?" she asked Jonah, who stood by her desk, nervously shifting his weight from his good leg to his injured one. The fluorescent lights cast shadows across his weathered face as he hovered anxiously. "Back of Merle's filing cabinet. Fell behind it maybe years ago." He ran a hand through his sun-bleached hair, leaving it standing slightly on end. Was cleaning, and there it was, like a gift. Stuck between the metal and the wall. Must have slipped down when someone was in a hurry. The amounts jumped out at her. $2,000, $2,500, $3,000. Way more than their standard $100 adoption fee. Each figure seemed to pulse on the page, a silent accusation against everything the shelter was supposed to stand for. "These aren't donations," Larkin murmured, tracing the columns with her fingertip. "They're sales, high-value sales." Her office phone rang, making them both jump. Jonah pulled out his phone, hitting record, something they'd started doing for every interaction involving Merle. The small red light blinked steadily, a tiny beacon of potential justice. "Hayes," Larkin answered, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Need you in the intake area?" Merle's voice crackled through, clipped and authoritative. "Got a special placement to discuss? Potential private transfer." Jonah's eyes met hers. He nodded and followed at a distance as Larkin headed to intake, the crumpled paper tucked securely in her pocket like contraband. The hallway stretched before them, institutional white walls bearing faded posters about responsible pet ownership. Merle stood by the counter, scrolling through her phone, glasses perched uselessly on top of her head. Her stocky frame was rigid with purpose. "Got a private party interested in some of our more challenging cases." She glanced up, not bothering to hide her impatience. "Good homes, good compensation for the shelter. The kind of discretionary funds we need." "You mean like the ones in this ledger?" Larkin pulled out the weathered page, laying it flat on the counter between them with deliberate slowness. Color drained from Merle's face, her professional mask slipping for just a moment. "Where did you—" She caught herself, squaring her shoulders. "That's private, administrative material, not for general staff consumption." "With unregistered payments? From Eskeen?" Larkin's voice stayed steady despite her racing heart. She could feel her pulse throbbing in her fingertips as they rested on the damning document. "You're overstepping, Hayes." Merle's tone dropped dangerously low, almost a whisper that wouldn't carry. "These arrangements help keep our lights on. Not everything fits in the county's budget boxes. Sometimes practical solutions require flexibility." Behind a filing cabinet, Jonah's phone recorded every word, every damning justification that would later reveal the depth of the betrayal. Later that afternoon, the front desk buzzed. "Ms. Hayes, someone here to see Rook." The receptionist's voice carried a note of unease that immediately set Larkin on edge. Larkin's stomach clenched when she saw Silas Keene's broad frame filling the doorway. He wore expensive work boots caked with just enough mud to seem authentic, and a smile that never reached his eyes. Cold, calculating pools that assessed everything as property to be claimed. "Just checking on my property," he said smoothly, walking toward Rook's kennel with the confidence of someone unused to being denied. His gaze drifted to where Tamsin sat with Bram in the visiting area, the boy happily stacking plastic blocks on the floor. "Quite a coincidence, running into everyone here. Almost like a family reunion." Bram looked up at the sound of Silas's voice, his small face registering something beyond his years, a wariness no 1-year-old should possess. Rook's posture changed instantly, alert, tense, muscles coiled tight beneath his black and tan coat, but positioning himself between the child and his former owner. His torn ear twitched, but he made no sound. "This dog has a hold status," Larkin said firmly, stepping directly into Silas's path. "No visits without prior authorization. Shelter policy." "Funny thing about property laws," Silas replied, still watching Bram, who now clung to his mother's leg. "Ownership's pretty clear-cut. Right, Tamsin?" The name rolled off his tongue like a threat wrapped in familiarity. Tamsin gathered Bram quickly, her movements practiced and efficient, heading for the exit. Her dark curls fell forward, partially obscuring her face, but Larkin could see the tension in her jaw. Silas's smile widened slightly as he watched them leave, the satisfaction of creating fear evident in his expression. That evening, Larkin sat in Sarah Chen's law office, spreading out their evidence across the polished oak desk. The ledger page with its incriminating figures, Jonah's recordings on a flash drive, Tamsin's written statement about the training facility where dogs emerged broken or not at all. "It's compelling," Sarah admitted, tapping her pen against her legal pad, "but also dangerous. These kinds of operations have deep roots. One wrong move." She didn't need to finish the sentence. The implications hung in the air, between them, as tangible as the evidence itself. "So we do nothing?" Larkin's frustration burst out, her voice rising despite herself. "Let them keep using the shelter as a front? Watch more dogs disappear into whatever hell he's running?" "No." Sarah tapped the ledger, her expression resolute. "We do it smart. Control the narrative. Build the case completely before we move." She reached for her phone, scrolling through contacts. "I know a reporter at the Herald. Trustworthy, thorough. Doesn't publish until everything's verified. Let's build this story right." Larkin nodded slowly. The weight of what they were about to do settled on her shoulders. Not just exposing Merle's deals, but challenging Silas's entire operation with its county connections and financial tentacles. She thought of Rook's scars, of Tamsin's fear when Silas entered a room, of all the dogs that had disappeared into private placements over the years. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's do it, but we need to protect Tamsin and Bram. And Rook." Her voice caught slightly on the dog's name. "They'll be his first targets when this breaks." Sarah started making notes, her handwriting precise and determined. "We'll need security measures in place before this breaks, for all of you. I know people who can help, discreetly." Back at the shelter, Larkin found Jonah waiting in the dim parking lot, leaning against his weathered truck. "Merle's been shredding files," he said quietly, limping toward her. "Came back for some overtime. Heard the machine running for hours." "Too late," Larkin replied, touching the ledger in her pocket like a talisman. "We've got what we need. The digital trail won't disappear so easily." She walked Jonah to his truck, then headed back inside to finish her rounds. The shelter was quiet now, most staff gone home, only the soft sounds of animals settling for the night. She made her way to Rook's kennel, watching him settle into his evening routine, circling 3 times before lying down on his blanket, eyes still alert but body relaxing incrementally. He'd come so far from that first day, still cautious, but no longer terrified of every shadow and sound. His eyes met hers with a trust that made her next steps clear, his gaze holding steady where once he would have looked away. The evidence was ready. Tomorrow, they would begin dismantling a system that had failed too many for too long. Larkin thought of Silas's veiled threats, of Merle's desperate paper shredding, of the money trail that would soon be exposed to public scrutiny. But looking at Rook, at his quiet resilience despite everything he'd endured, she knew some risks were worth taking. Some battles had to be fought. Not just for one dog, but for every animal that deserved better than becoming someone's profitable property, every creature reduced to a figure in a ledger or a tool for intimidation. "We're going to fix this," she whispered through the kennel bars. Rook's ears perked forward, slightly, as if understanding the promise beneath her words. The morning headlines hit like a thunderclap. "County shelter under investigation. Private sales ring exposed." Larkin's hands shook as she unfolded the newspaper at her desk. The article laid out everything: the irregular payments, the bypassed protocols, the pattern of challenging dogs vanishing into private hands. By 9 a.m., The shelter phones wouldn't stop ringing. Donors demanded explanations. Board members called emergency meetings. Local TV vans parked outside, their satellite dishes reaching toward the gray autumn sky. Merle barricaded herself in her office, emerging only when the county commissioners arrived. Suits and badges and stern expressions. Larkin watched through the break room window as they filed into the conference room. "You did good," Jonah said, sliding a coffee across the table to her. "Look." He pointed to his phone screen. The shelter's biggest donor, Martha Whitaker, had posted a public statement. "Immediate reforms required or annual funding withdrawn." The conference room door opened. Merle's face was ashen as she followed the commissioners down the hall. Her usual confident stride had shrunk to small, careful steps. "Ms. Whitcomb," one commissioner called, "please explain these financial discrepancies." Merle's response was barely audible. "Standard operating procedure for difficult placements? $3,000 for a single dog transfer, without board approval?" Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Merle retreated back into her office, closing the blinds. By afternoon, the shelter's attorney announced an emergency board meeting. Larkin received the email she'd been fighting for. Subject: extended hold status approved. Dog ID Rook. She hurried to Rook's kennel, relief making her shoulders sag. "You're safe," she whispered through the chain link. "They can't move you now." Rook watched her with those intelligent eyes, his tail giving a single, gentle wag. He'd started doing that lately, small signs of trust breaking through his fear. But Victory's sweetness turned bitter too quickly. The first threat came that evening, a phone call that made the front desk volunteer's face go white. He said they know where we all live. The second arrived in Larkin's email, a photo of her house, taken that morning, with a single word. "Soon." Tamsin burst into the shelter just before closing. Bram clutched to her chest. "He was there," she said, her voice shaking. "Outside my apartment, just watching." Larkin guided them to the break room, away from windows. Bram reached for her, his small hands grasping at her shirt until she held him. "What exactly did Silas do?" "Nothing. Everything." Tamsin paced. "He stood there for an hour, called my landlord about maintenance concerns, left a toy for Bram on the welcome mat, one of his old ones from before." "Messages," Larkin said quietly, "showing he can get close." "I can't go back there." Tamsin's eyes welled up. "He's letting me know he still has control." Jonah appeared in the doorway, his usual calm demeanor strained. "Larkin, you need to see this." On his phone was a message from an unknown number, security footage from inside the shelter, showing Rook's kennel. The timestamp was from last week. The message read, "Everything has a price." "He's got someone inside," Jonah said. Larkin felt the walls closing in. Their victory had unleashed something darker than institutional corruption. They'd wounded a man who measured his worth in power and control. She made calls to Sarah Chen, to sympathetic board members, to the detective who'd started investigating the shelter's finances. Help was coming, but slowly. Bureaucracy moved at its own pace, blind to urgent fears. "You're staying with me tonight," she told Tamsin. "Both of you." "What about Rook?" Jonah asked. Larkin looked through the break room window at his kennel. "I'm staying here too. We keep watches, security system armed, cameras running." She sent Jonah home with instructions to vary his route, check his car for trackers, call when he arrived. The shelter settled into evening quiet, but every sound made them jump. Pipes creaking, wind rattling windows, distant car doors. Bram slept on a makeshift bed of blankets, while Tamsin dozed fitfully nearby. Larkin sat at her desk, watching security feeds, jumping at shadows. The extended hold protected Rook legally, but paper barriers meant nothing to men like Silas. Her phone buzzed. Another unknown number. A video played. Silas at some training facility, dogs performing aggressive commands at his whistle. The message below: systems can be changed. People can be persuaded. Outside, a car drove slowly past the shelter. Its headlights swept across the windows, lingering too long. Larkin's hand tightened on her phone, ready to dial 911. The car moved on, but its message was clear. They were being watched. In his kennel, Rook stood alert, tracking movement none of them could see. His posture spoke of old training asserting itself, guarding, protecting, despite his fear. Larkin watched him and understood. Their small victory had cracked open something much larger. Merle's questioning was just the beginning. They'd challenged not just a corrupt system, but a man who saw the world as things to be owned and controlled. She looked at Tamsin and Bram, at Rook standing guard in his kennel, at the shadows pressing against the windows. They'd won the first battle, but the war was far from over. Silas had retreated to rebuild his strategy, to gather allies who operated in darkness rather than boardrooms. The night stretched ahead, full of creaking sounds and passing cars, of phones that might ring with new threats, of shadows that might become real dangers. They had the law on their side now, but laws were just paper. And paper, as they all knew, could burn. The morning started like broken glass, sharp and scattered. Tamsin's scream echoed through her phone, making Larkin's hands shake as she fumbled with her car keys. "He's gone," Tamsin's voice cracked. "I just went to get the mail. 2 minutes. He was right there in the hallway playing with his blocks, and now he's gone." Larkin's tires squealed as she pulled out of the shelter's parking lot. "Did you call the police?" "They're coming, but..." Tamsin's breath came in gasps. "There was a toy, one of his old ones from when we lived with Silas. It was in the hallway. Bram must have followed it." Jonah met them at Tamsin's apartment complex, his usual calm replaced by tight-lipped urgency. Police cars crowded the parking lot, their lights painting everything in rotating red and blue. Inside, officers documented the scene. Scattered blocks on the hallway floor, a stuffed elephant, Bram's favorite from his time with Silas, dropped near the stairwell door. No signs of struggle, no witnesses, just a carefully laid trail that had led a curious toddler away from safety. "He planned this," Larkin said, watching Tamsin shake as she answered police questions. "The threats, the surveillance, he was looking for an opening." Jonah nodded grimly. "After the shelter exposure, he lost his legitimate ways to get Rook. This is his backup plan." As if on cue, Larkin's phone buzzed. Unknown number. A video played. Bram sitting on a concrete floor, playing with old toys. The camera panned to show metal shelving, construction equipment, peeling paint. A workshop or warehouse. The message below was simple. "Bring the dog. Alone. 1 hour." "I know where that is," Tamsin whispered, looking over Larkin's shoulder. "His old workshop, where he..." She swallowed hard. "Where he used to train the dogs." Detective Sarah Chen arrived, her face grim. "We're getting a warrant, but the building's dangerous. It's been condemned. Faulty wiring, chemical storage, unstable structure. He's using it as insurance against a tactical team." "He knows exactly what he's doing," Jonah said quietly. "Creating a situation where we can't risk going in force." Larkin paced, her mind racing. "The trailer fire? You said Rook was there, that he saved someone?" Tamsin nodded. "A worker's child. The trailer caught fire during training. Rook broke his chain, got the kid out before anyone even knew what was happening. Silas was furious, said it showed weak training. That's why Rook responds to Bram. Larkin realized. Children trigger his protective instinct, override the fear conditioning. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Time's wasting. The wiring here is very old. Accidents happen. They gathered in Tamsin's kitchen, spreading out building plans Chen had pulled. The workshop sprawled across 2 floors, with multiple exits and a maze of storage rooms. Perfect for someone who wanted to control access and movement. He's not just after Rook anymore, Larkin said. This is about control. Over Tamsin, over the shelter exposure, over everything he's losing. 50 minutes. Jonah checked his watch. What's the play? Chen pointed to the plans. We've got units moving into position, but if he sees them, he'll use the building's hazards as a threat, Larkin finished. We need a different approach. She studied the layout, remembering Rook's scars, his fears, his unexpected gentleness with Bram. Everything connected. The whistle training, the fire rescue, the careful way Silas had built his trap. He's expecting me to bring Rook in through the front, she said slowly, walking right into his control zone. But what if... They huddled closer, voices low, as Larkin outlined her thought. It was dangerous, maybe impossible, but it used everything they knew about Rook, about Silas, about the patterns of control, and the moments when they broke. 40 minutes later, they moved. Chen coordinated with her units, positioning them out of sight. Jonah checked the building's rear approaches. Tamsin trembled but stood ready. Larkin's phone buzzed one final time. 30 minutes. Front door. You, the dog, no one else. Or we test these old circuits. Through the shelter's security cameras, they could see Rook in his kennel. He stood alert, as if sensing the tension in the air. For a moment, Larkin remembered that first day. His flinching, his fear, his unexpected moment of trust with a toddler. Now everything depended on that trust being stronger than Silas's training, on love being stronger than fear. They had to move fast. The old workshop loomed ahead, its windows dark except for one faint light on the second floor. Inside, a small boy played with toys, unaware of the dangers surrounding him. And somewhere in those shadows, a man waited, believing he still controlled all the pieces of his game. But he'd forgotten something crucial about both dogs and people. Sometimes, when pushed too far, they broke their chains. The 30-minute timer ticked down as they finalized their positions. Through the workshop's grimy windows, they could see the faint movement of shadows. Silas was waiting, thinking he held all the cards. He didn't know what was coming. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the workshop's weathered exterior as Larkin and Jonah crouched behind a rusted dumpster. She held Rook's leash with trembling hands, watching the building's single lit window. "Remember," she whispered, "we need to keep him talking. Give Chen's team time to—" A sharp crack echoed from inside. Larkin's heart jumped. Through her earpiece, Chen's voice crackled. "Movement on the second floor. West side." Rook's ears pricked forward, his muscles tense. The German Shepherd seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, staying perfectly still beside Larkin. Jonah checked his watch. 20 minutes left on his deadline. They'd planned this carefully. Larkin would approach from the front as demanded, while Jonah circled to the building's rear entrance. Chen's team waited in the surrounding buildings, out of sight but ready. "Watch for the signal," Larkin reminded Jonah. He nodded and disappeared into the lengthening shadows. Taking a deep breath, Larkin stepped into view with Rook. The workshop's main door creaked open at her approach. The smell hit her first. Oil, old wood, and something chemical that made her nose burn. "Inside," Silas's voice commanded from the darkness. "Slow." Larkin entered, Rook close to her leg. The interior was cluttered with abandoned equipment, sheets of plywood, and stacks of old pallets. Perfect kindling, she realized with growing dread. "Where's Bram?" she called out. "Safe." Silas emerged from behind a support beam, his face hard in the dim light. "For now." A child's cry echoed from above, making Rook's head snap up. The dog trembled but held his position. "You've lost, Silas," Larkin said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The ledger's public. Merle's already talking to investigators." "Merle?" Silas laughed coldly. "She's been on my payroll for years. Every dog she helped me acquire, every record she buried, it's all documented. If I go down, she falls harder." Through her earpiece, Chen whispered, "Keep him talking, almost in position." Larkin took another step forward, scanning the workshop. The air felt thick, and she noticed small puddles of liquid near the walls. Her stomach clenched as she recognized the sharp scent of gasoline. "It was never just about the dogs, was it?" she asked, playing for time. "You needed control, over Tamsin, over Bram." "I built everything here," Silas's voice rose. "My business, my reputation, and you in that shelter tried to take it all." Another cry from above, closer this time. Rook's ears flattened, but his eyes never left Silas. Suddenly, there was movement in the shadows. Jonah had made it to the rear stairs, exactly as planned. But Silas noticed too. His hand went to his pocket, producing something that glinted in the dim light. "I warned you to come alone." His voice turned dangerous. He raised a lighter, the flame dancing. "Now we do this my way." The lighter arced through the air, landing in a puddle of gasoline. Fire exploded across the floor, racing along the trails of fuel. Smoke billowed up, thick and choking. "No!" Larkin lunged forward, but Silas was already running for the stairs. Through her earpiece, Chen shouted, "Move in! All units, move in now!" The fire spread with terrifying speed, feeding on the old wood and chemicals. Somewhere above, Bram started screaming. Rook surged against his leash, pulling Larkin toward the stairs. The dog's training warred visibly with his instincts. One ear turned toward Silas's whistled commands from above, the other focused on Bram's cries. Jonah appeared through the smoke. "Backstairs are blocked. He must have jammed them before we arrived." The fire was everywhere now, climbing the walls, turning the workshop into an inferno. Through the chaos, they heard Silas laugh, a sound of pure malice. That made Rook growl deep in his chest. "Your choice, Larkin," Silas called down. "Save the evidence against me or save the boy. The office with all those precious documents is right through there." He pointed to a door across the burning room. "But Bram's up here with me. Choose fast. This place won't last long." The heat was becoming unbearable. Smoke stung Larkin's eyes as she looked at the office door, knowing the proof they needed lay inside. Then she heard Bram cough, a tiny sound above the roar of flames, and knew there was no choice at all. Rook seemed to reach the same conclusion. With a snarl that defied years of conditioning, he lunged toward the main stairs, dragging Larkin with him. The dog that had once saved a child from fire was choosing to do it again, breaking Silas's control forever. The stairs groaned under their weight as flames licked at the banister. Somewhere in the inferno, Silas's whistle cut through the chaos, but this time, Rook didn't even flinch. Through the thick smoke, Rook's muscles tensed beneath Larkin's hand. His entire body quivered with conflict, torn between opposing forces. His training screamed at him to obey the whistle, hardwired into his nervous system through countless brutal lessons. But Bram's frightened whimpers pulled at something deeper, a memory of another fire, another child who needed him, one he'd saved before being discarded like broken equipment. The wooden stairs creaked dangerously as they climbed, threatening to give way with each step. Particles of ash swirled in the heated air, stinging their eyes and coating their throats. Rook pressed forward with determined focus, his sensitive nose working methodically through the acrid smoke, tracking the faint scent of baby powder and fear. Behind them, Jonah called out coordinates to the emergency teams through his phone, his voice steady despite the crackling flames that licked at the walls around them. "Second floor, northeast corner. Fire's spreading fast. We've located the child but need immediate assistance." Another whistle pierced the air, sharper and more demanding. Rook froze mid-step, his whole body trembling so violently that his paws clattered against the floorboards. Larkin saw the struggle playing out in his intelligent eyes, years of cruel conditioning fighting against pure protective instinct. The battle was visceral, his muscles twitching as though electric currents ran through them. Then Bram coughed again, the sound weak and muffled through the wall of smoke, feeble in a way that squeezed Larkin's heart. Something in Rook snapped, a chain breaking inside him. With a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from the depths of his soul, he lunged forward, breaking free from Larkin's grip. His powerful shoulders bunched and released as he smashed through a partially blocked doorway, splintering the weakened wood. "There!" Jonah pointed through the billowing smoke, his sleeve pressed against his mouth. Silas had wedged Bram behind fallen shelving units, creating a deliberate maze of twisted metal and charred wood. The baby's tiny fingers reached through a gap, grasping at empty air. Rook didn't hesitate for even a heartbeat. He threw his solid body against the shelving, ignoring the hot metal that singed his fur and seared his skin. The shelves groaned and shifted with a metallic screech. Again and again, he slammed into them, each impact echoing through the burning building, making enough space for his muscular body to squeeze through. Blood matted his fur where sharp edges had caught him, but he showed no sign of slowing. Larkin and Jonah worked frantically to clear debris alongside him, their hands quickly becoming slick with sweat and blood from the sharp edges. The heat was becoming unbearable, pressing down on them like a physical weight. Above them, wooden beams started to crack with horrible splitting sounds, showering them with glowing embers. Silas appeared through the swirling smoke, like a demon materializing from hell, his face twisted with rage and desperation. Sweat poured down his contorted features, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and fury. "Get back!" He raised something metal, a heavy piece of pipe, its end glowing faintly orange. "He's mine! Everything here is mine!" But Rook was beyond fear now, transformed by something stronger than years of abuse. As Silas swung the pipe in a vicious arc, the dog caught it in his powerful jaws with precise timing, wrenching it away with such force that metal scraped against teeth. The sudden redistribution of weight sent Silas stumbling backward into the wall, momentarily stunning him. Bram's crying grew clearer as Rook reached him, the baby's face streaked with soot and tears. The dog's gentle nature emerged even in this life-or-death crisis. He didn't grab or drag, but carefully nuzzled the boy with soft whines of reassurance, guiding him toward Larkin's outstretched arms. His movements were delicate, almost tender, despite the chaos surrounding them. "I've got you," Larkin whispered, lifting Bram against her chest, feeling his tiny heart hammering against her own. "I've got you both. You're safe now." Her voice broke on the last words as she pulled the child close, her eyes meeting Rook's through the smoke. A thunderous crack split the air above them, like a gunshot magnified 100-fold. The ceiling was giving way, beams sagging visibly. Rook pressed against Larkin's legs with urgent purpose, herding her and Bram toward the stairs. His body became a living shield, covering them protectively as burning debris rained down from above. A piece of flaming wood struck his back, but he didn't flinch or whimper, staying steadfastly between the threat and those he'd chosen to protect. Silas lunged one last time, recovering his balance and reaching desperately for Bram, fingers grasping at the child's clothing. But Rook was faster, his movements fluid and decisive. Without baring teeth or drawing blood, he body-checked Silas away from the child with calculated force, his years of training transformed into protective power rather than aggression. Red and blue lights flashed rhythmically through the smoke-smudged windows, casting eerie colored shadows across the burning interior. Sirens wailed outside, their urgent cries growing louder by the second. The fire teams were finally here, their voices calling up to the building. "This way!" Jonah had found a clear path down, his experienced eyes spotting the safest route through the deteriorating structure. He took Bram from Larkin's trembling arms as Rook guided them through the thickening smoke, the dog's body always positioned between them and the worst of the flames. The last whistle cut through the chaos. Desperate now, almost pleading, a commander losing control of his weapon. Rook's torn ear twitched in recognition, but he didn't turn back or hesitate. Instead, he pressed closer to Bram, his choice made forever. Love over fear, protection over pain, family over slavery. They burst out of the workshop into the shocking coolness of night air just as the second floor collapsed behind them with a deafening roar. Emergency crews swarmed forward like a wave, oxygen masks ready, hands reaching to help. Through the commotion of flashing lights and shouting voices, Larkin saw police officers pulling a handcuffed Silas from a side exit, his face blackened with smoke and defeat. Jonah held up a waterproof bag, his expression grim but triumphant, despite his singed eyebrows and soot-streaked face. "Got the ledger and recordings, all of it. Every transaction, every fight, every dog he's ever broken. He's finished." But Larkin barely heard him. She was watching Rook, who had settled next to Bram on a paramedic's blanket, creating a protective curve around the small boy. The dog's head rested gently against the baby's leg, a guardian finally at peace. His eyes, once filled with wariness and memories of pain, were now soft and clear, finally free of the shadows that had haunted them. In their place was something Larkin had never seen before: contentment and the quiet certainty of belonging. In the days that followed, the county courthouse buzzed with activity. Larkin sat in a hard wooden chair, her hands clasped tightly as she testified about the pattern of suspicious transfers and Merle's coded ledger entries. "And these payments?" The prosecutor held up a document. "They were made directly to the shelter's auxiliary account?" "Yes," Larkin said clearly, "marked as private placement fees, but without proper documentation." In the gallery, reporters scribbled notes. The story had exploded across local media, not just Bram's kidnapping and rescue, but the years of institutional neglect that had enabled it. Jonah's recordings played in the courtroom, Merle's voice crackling through the speakers. "We have ways of handling special requests. Discretion is part of our service." Merle sat, with her shoulders hunched, her glasses pushed up into her graying hair. She wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. The county had suspended her immediately after the fire, pending a full investigation of the shelter's practices. Silas's arraignment was harder. Tamsin trembled as she described his controlling behavior, the way he'd used both animals and people as possessions to be dominated. Bram stayed with a court-appointed caregiver during the proceedings, Rook never leaving his side. "He said he'd take everything," Tamsin testified, her voice growing stronger. "That's why I left. But I never thought he'd—" She stopped, drawing a shaky breath. "I never thought he'd go after our son." The media latched onto Rook's story. Pictures of the German Shepherd protecting Bram circulated widely. "From abuse to hero," read one headline. "Guard dog breaks training to save child," declared another. At the shelter, changes rippled through the system. County officials ordered a complete audit of adoption records. New oversight committees formed. Staff members who had looked the other way found themselves explaining years of silence. Larkin spent long hours with investigators, unraveling the network that had allowed Silas to acquire aggressive dogs for his private security business. Some animals were traced to other contractors, leading to more arrests and seizures. "We've got 4 more facilities to check," Jonah told her one evening, spreading out a map. His quiet dedication had never wavered. "But the DA thinks we've broken the main supply chain." Through it all, Rook's calm presence anchored them. He stayed close to Bram during supervised visits, their bond growing stronger. The dog who had once flinched at every movement now rested his head on the boy's lap, completely at peace. Tamsin found a new apartment, farther from Silas's old territory. She started therapy, working through the trauma of the kidnapping and years of emotional abuse. Sometimes she'd sit with Larkin after Bram's visits, both of them watching the child and dog play. "I don't know how to thank you," Tamsin said softly one day, "for seeing what was happening, for fighting when everyone else looked away." Larkin struggled with the shelter's future. Rook's adoption status remained uncertain, technically still a ward of the county until all legal proceedings concluded. She knew he belonged with Bram, but the process had to be done right this time. No shortcuts. The reforms came slowly but steadily. New protocols for tracking animals, mandatory reporting of suspicious injuries, training for staff to recognize signs of abuse and trafficking. The shelter's transformation became a model for other counties. "It's not just about the animals," Larkin explained to a local news crew. "It's about the connection between cruelty and control, about speaking up when systems fail." Each day brought small victories. Former employees came forward with more evidence. Other shelters began examining their own practices. Silas's construction contracts underwent scrutiny, revealing a web of intimidation and payoffs. Rook's story became a symbol of resilience, of choosing love over fear, of breaking free from conditioning. But for those who knew him, he was simply a good dog who had finally found his true home. The real victory was in his quiet moments with Bram, both of them healing, both of them safe at last. The courthouse steps gleamed in the morning sun as Silas's trial concluded. Larkin watched him being led away in handcuffs, his shoulders no longer squared with arrogance. The jury had taken less than 3 hours to return their verdict. Guilty on all counts. 10 years, Jonah whispered, standing beside her. "Plus the trafficking charges still pending?" Tamsin squeezed Larkin's hand, relief visible in the softening of her features. "It's really over." Back at the shelter, change bloomed like spring flowers. New protocols lined the walls, and fresh faces filled positions once held by those who'd enabled the corruption. Merle's office stood empty, awaiting a director who would prioritize protection over profit. "The adoption papers are ready," said Mrs. Chen, the shelter's new legal advisor, spreading documents across her desk. "Since Tamsin has provided written support for your application, everything's in order." Larkin's hands trembled as she signed. Each stroke of the pen felt momentous, officially binding Rook to their unconventional family. The German shepherd sat quietly beside her chair, his presence steady and sure. "There's one more thing," Tamsin said that evening, as they watched Bram and Rook playing in the shelter's newly fenced yard. I think we should talk about us." Larkin turned, heart quickening. The past months had drawn them closer, shared danger and healing, creating bonds stronger than friendship. "Us?" "You saved my son," Tamsin said softly. "But more than that, you showed me what real strength looks like." She reached for Larkin's hand. "I'd like to see where this goes," slowly. Jonah helped them move into a small house near the shelter, his quiet support evident in carefully installed baby gates and a custom-built dog bed in Bram's room. The neighborhood was peaceful, far from Silas's old territory. "Remember when you first saw him?" Jonah asked one afternoon, watching Rook guide Bram away from a hot stove with gentle persistence. "All those scars, that fear in his eyes?" Larkin nodded, amazed by the transformation. Rook still carried physical reminders of his past, the torn ear, the faint marks around his muzzle, but his spirit had healed. He no longer flinched at sudden movements or cowered at loud noises. The shelter's reforms spread beyond their county. Other facilities began implementing similar protections, creating a network to track suspicious patterns and prevent trafficking. Larkin found herself speaking at conferences, sharing their story as a blueprint for change. "It starts with seeing them," she told a packed room. "Really seeing them, the animals, the people, the patterns of abuse, and then having the courage to act. Home became a sanctuary of small moments, Bram's laughter echoing through sunny rooms, Rook's steady presence during thunderstorms, Tamsin's gentle kisses in the kitchen. They created new traditions, Sunday picnics, evening walks, bedtime stories with a large German shepherd as an attentive audience. "Safe," Bram said one night, his small hand buried in Rook's fur. It was one of his new words, learned in the warmth of their transformed family. Larkin watched them from the doorway, Tamsin's arm around her waist. The sight of them together, boy and dog, both rescued, both healing, filled her heart with quiet joy. They had built something precious from the ruins of fear, a family bound by choice and love rather than obligation. Rook lifted his head, meeting her eyes with calm trust. Gone was the terrified animal who had cowered in a shelter kennel. In his place lay a guardian who had chosen love over conditioning, courage over fear. His transformation mirrored their own, from broken pieces to something whole and beautiful. The evening light painted shadows on the wall as Bram drifted to sleep, Rook maintaining his faithful vigil. Tamsin squeezed Larkin's hand, and in that gentle pressure lay all their shared history. The fear, the fight, and finally, the peace they'd found together.